Judge Daniel Harper was known for his efficiency. His courtroom, small but functional, was a place where cases were processed quickly and without much fanfare. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Everything had its place, and he was determined to keep the gears of justice turning smoothly. On this particular afternoon, he was presiding over what seemed like a routine traffic violation. A black woman, Dr. Jasmine Cole, stood before him. She was dressed in a smart professional suit that looked slightly out of place in the otherwise mundane setting of the courthouse. Her long, dark hair was neatly tied back, and her posture was confident but not arrogant. She held herself with an air of quiet authority, but Judge Harper didn't give her much more than a passing glance as she took the stand. Her eyes, though focused, held a distant quality, as if her mind was elsewhere. Perhaps she had a busy day, or maybe something deeper was preoccupying her thoughts. The judge glanced at the paperwork in front of him. It was a minor violation, a failure to yield at an intersection. Nothing that would normally catch his attention. "Dr. Cole, I see you were cited for failing to yield at a crosswalk," Judge Harper said, his voice clipped. "This is a standard infraction. Given your record, I'm issuing a fine of $150. Payment is due within the next 30 days. Dr. Cole nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." There was no further back and forth, no excuses or explanations offered. Judge Harper was accustomed to people pleading their cases, trying to get their fines reduced or dismissed. But Dr. Cole didn't try to explain herself, nor did she protest the fine. She just accepted it. This intrigued the judge, though it didn't prompt him to give her much more thought. People often accepted fines quietly. Most just wanted to get in and out of the courthouse as quickly as possible. As Dr. Cole turned to leave, her demeanor remained composed, but the brief flicker of her eyes as she exited the courtroom caught the judge's attention. It wasn't defiance, but something else, a quiet strength. She walked with the poise of someone used to being in control, someone who didn't feel the need to make a fuss over the little things. It was a calm confidence, one that didn't need validation from anyone else. But for now, Judge Harper simply dismissed it. The courtroom was soon filled with the usual bustle as the next case was called. The fine was written up, and Dr. Cole left the room without fanfare. To the judge, it was just another minor infraction, another small case in his day. Little did he know that this simple encounter would soon reveal the true nature of the woman before him. An encounter that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the world and about her. After the case was closed, Judge Harper quickly turned his attention to the next matter, filing away Dr. Jasmine Cole's name into the long list of mundane infractions he handled each day. To him, she was just another face in the crowd, another person caught in the web of bureaucracy, paying the price for a simple mistake. But as the afternoon wore on, his thoughts lingered on her for reasons he couldn't quite pinpoint. Dr. Cole had made an impression, though not in the way people usually did in his courtroom. Her quiet composure, the way she seemed unaffected by the minor inconvenience of the ticket, stood out. He knew she had a certain level of professionalism, but there was something about her that seemed different from the others, something more. As the day ended, Judge Harper couldn't shake the thought of her, so he decided to do what he did best when curiosity struck. He began researching. His interest, initially casual, deepened as he learned more about Dr. Cole. He wasn't prepared for what he uncovered. Dr. Jasmine Cole, it turned out, was far from an ordinary woman. She was a decorated former Army officer who had spent years shaping the future of military strategy and technology. Born and raised in a small town, she had always excelled, finishing at the top of her class in both high school and college. But her real contributions began when she joined the U.S. Army after completing her doctorate in engineering. It wasn't long before she became one of the leading minds behind modern military tactics. Jasmine was part of a select team that had revolutionized the way the Army communicated and coordinated on the battlefield. Her research and innovations in battlefield technologies, including advancements in secure communication systems and strategic deployment methods, had saved lives and given soldiers an edge in combat that had never existed before. As Judge Harper scrolled through the online articles, interviews, and white papers written by or about her, he felt a growing sense of awe and disbelief. He learned that Jasmine had been responsible for several key innovations in military strategy, one of which involved a system that allowed troops to communicate securely and in real time, even in the most chaotic of battlefields. Her work had played a pivotal role in several successful military campaigns, and her efforts were still shaping the future of Army operations. But Jasmine, despite her undeniable impact, had remained humble and largely out of the public eye. She wasn't seeking fame or recognition. She was focused on her mission to serve her country and make a difference in the world. It became clear to Judge Harper that she was far from the ordinary citizen he had assumed her to be. The woman he had found earlier was an extraordinary force in the world of military innovation. Now, feeling a mix of admiration and embarrassment, Judge Harper couldn't help but wonder what he had missed in that brief, casual encounter in his courtroom. He judged her based on her appearance, on the fact that she looked like someone who didn't belong in a military strategy role, much less someone who had shaped the future of Army operations. But the more he read, the more he realized how wrong he had been. Judge Harper had spent the better part of his evening delving into Dr. Jasmine Cole's background. The more he uncovered, the deeper his sense of embarrassment grew. He had unwittingly dismissed someone who, in reality, was a person of immense accomplishment. The woman who had calmly accepted her traffic fine was not just a quiet professional, but a trailblazer whose contributions had shaped modern military strategies. His mind raced with the thought of how easily he had made assumptions based on superficial impressions. The realization struck harder than he expected. He found himself replaying their brief interaction in his mind. Her calm demeanor, her lack of argument or protest. It seemed so simple then, but now it felt like he had missed a vital piece of who she was. He thought about the way he had handed down the fine so matter-of-factly, without even considering the possibility that she might be someone of immense importance. The judge was no stranger to high-profile cases, but he had never come across someone like Dr. Cole. Her name was beginning to surface in conversations around town as well, and as word spread, more details about her career emerged. People who had known her in passing were starting to realize the magnitude of her work. Local newspapers were picking up stories about her, and even the courthouse staff started whispering about her military background and groundbreaking work. What had started as a minor case quickly morphed into something far larger in the eyes of the public. Judge Harper's curiosity only deepened with the growing buzz. He couldn't stop himself from looking into her achievements further. One story particularly caught his attention. It was an interview with Dr. Cole, where she discussed her journey from military officer to one of the Army's foremost experts in tactical innovation. She spoke candidly about her desire to make a difference, to improve the lives of soldiers, and to protect the nation. But she did so without any of the fanfare or self-promotion that typically accompany such accomplishments. She was modest to a fault, despite the fact that her work had revolutionized how the military operated on the front lines. It wasn't long before Judge Harper was sharing his findings with some of his colleagues. As he explained the breadth of Dr. Cole's achievements, he realized that the people in his circle were just as shocked as he was. His initial, fleeting judgment had been based entirely on surface-level information. Her race, her calm demeanor, and the fact that she didn't fit the mold of what he had imagined a military innovator should look like. But as the pieces of the puzzle came together, Judge Harper began to question everything he thought he knew about people, assumptions, and the justice system he had spent years upholding. He had misjudged Dr. Cole in the worst way possible. What was more unsettling was the realization that this was a mistake too many people made every day, without even realizing the lasting impact it had. As Judge Harper continued to dig into Dr. Jasmine Cole's background, the weight of his earlier assumptions began to settle uncomfortably on his shoulders. The more he uncovered, the more embarrassed he became. His mind raced with questions. How could he have missed all of this? How had he so easily dismissed someone who had shaped the future of military operations? Jasmine's work was unparalleled, and yet, in that moment in the courtroom, He had reduced her to just another defendant, someone who had simply made a minor mistake. He felt a deep sense of guilt, the kind that lingered uncomfortably, reminding him of the prejudice that had crept into his decision-making process. Judge Harper had always prided himself on fairness, on being impartial. But now, faced with the truth of Jasmine's accomplishments, he couldn't ignore the underlying bias that had informed his judgment. He realized that in judging her based on the way she appeared, on the fact that she was a black woman standing before him, he had not seen the full person. He hadn't taken the time to look beyond the surface. The more he learned about her work, the clearer it became just how wrong he had been. Dr. Cole had developed strategies and technologies that had directly contributed to saving countless lives in military conflicts. She had designed systems to improve troop coordination, enhanced battlefield communication methods, and revolutionized the way the Army approached logistics and tactical operations. Her influence on the modern battlefield was immeasurable, yet she had never sought public recognition for her contributions. One article stood out in particular. It was a feature on her role in a classified project that had fundamentally changed military tactics in the Middle East. The article described how Dr. Cole had developed a communication network that allowed soldiers to transmit real-time information across vast and dangerous terrains, effectively reducing response times in critical situations. It was the kind of innovation that didn't just change military strategy, it saved lives. The article also touched on her leadership, how she had earned the respect of her colleagues not through overt displays of authority, but through quiet intelligence and unshakable commitment to her mission. The more Judge Harper read, the more he felt the sting of his own ignorance. He had been so quick to dismiss her, so willing to judge her based on a fleeting moment in a courtroom, without bothering to understand who she really was or what she had accomplished. The shame of it weighed heavily on him. He realized that, in his mind, he had put her in a box based on stereotypes, the kind of unconscious bias he had always prided himself on avoiding. His discomfort grew as he realized how easily this could have happened to anyone. How many people had been unfairly judged, overlooked, or underestimated simply because others failed to see beyond the surface. And how many others were still being judged in the same way, without ever having the chance to prove themselves. As the days passed, Judge Harper found himself unable to shake the image of Dr. Jasmine Cole, her calm expression, her quiet dignity as she accepted the fine in his courtroom. That brief interaction now felt like a turning point, one he hadn't recognized in the moment, but couldn't ignore now. The more he learned about her, the more he felt compelled to make things right. The guilt had settled deep within him, and he knew he couldn't just let the situation go. He had made a mistake, a glaring one, and he needed to apologize. Determined to set things right, Judge Harper sought a way to reach out to Jasmine. He knew that her work had kept her busy, and he had no idea how she would react to a personal apology from someone she barely knew. But the more he thought about it, the more he understood that it wasn't just about his own feelings of guilt. It was about recognizing and addressing the biases he had allowed to color his judgment. This wasn't just about correcting one mistake. It was about acknowledging the bigger picture. The way society often overlooks the achievements of people based on preconceived notions and stereotypes. After several attempts to contact her, Judge Harper finally received a response. Jasmine agreed to meet him at a local cafe, a neutral space where they could talk without the formality of a courtroom or an office. He arrived early, his nerves on edge. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew that this conversation was long overdue. When Jasmine walked into the cafe, her presence was understated yet commanding. She was dressed casually now, in a simple blouse and jeans, but the same quiet confidence that had struck him in the courtroom was evident. She gave him a small, measured smile as she approached the table, but her eyes were sharp, analytical, as if she was already assessing the situation. "Thank you for meeting with me," Judge Harper began, his voice more hesitant than he expected. "I'm sure you're wondering why I asked to speak with you. To be honest, I've been thinking a lot about the way I handled your case in court." Jasmine raised an eyebrow but remained silent, giving him the space to continue. "I made a mistake," he said, the words coming out more easily than he had anticipated. "I saw you in my courtroom, and frankly, I didn't think much of it. I didn't take the time to understand who you really were, what you had accomplished. And because of that, I treated you as just another ordinary person, when you're anything but ordinary." He paused, feeling the weight of his words. "I was wrong. I let my assumptions guide my decisions, and I'm deeply sorry." Jasmine looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she spoke. "I appreciate your apology," she said, her voice steady, but not without a touch of warmth. "But the truth is, what you did isn't all that unusual. It happens every day, in bigger ways and smaller ones. People judge based on appearances, or what they think they know, and don't bother to dig any deeper. But it's good that you recognize the mistake, and I hope you can carry that with you from here on out." Her words were measured, but there was an undeniable strength in them. Judge Harper nodded, grateful for her grace, but also aware that his journey of understanding was only just beginning. This wasn't a simple apology to smooth things over. It was a lesson in humility, in learning to see people for who they truly were, not who he assumed them to be. The conversation with Jasmine left a lasting impact on Judge Harper. As he walked away from the cafe that day, he felt a mix of relief and discomfort. He had said what needed to be said, but the gravity of the situation lingered. Jasmine's words echoed in his mind, a quiet reminder of how much more there was to understand about bias, assumptions, and the consequences of hasty judgments. He knew the conversation wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much bigger. Back in the courthouse, the story of Jasmine's encounter with the judge had taken on a life of its own. Word spread quickly, first through the courthouse staff, then to the broader community. Local news outlets, ever eager to cover a story with a human interest angle, began to piece together the details of the traffic violation and the unexpected fallout. The fact that Dr. Cole had been fined for such a minor infraction seemed trivial in comparison to the extraordinary reality of who she was. What had initially seemed like a mundane courtroom encounter quickly became the focal point of a broader discussion. The media picked up on the angle, how a prominent woman in the military, an architect of critical tactical innovations, had been reduced to a simple traffic ticket. The irony was not lost on anyone. Jasmine's name, previously known only in military circles, began to surface in the mainstream media. She was no longer just a face in the crowd. She was the woman whose quiet contributions had changed the course of modern military operations. Her story became a symbol of the ways in which society often overlooks the accomplishments of those who don't fit traditional molds. As the articles and news segments circulated, Jasmine's phone began to ring. Invitations poured in, interviews, speaking engagements, and requests to share her story. She was invited to panels with military leaders, engineers, and strategists to discuss the future of defense technology. The same media outlets that had once only whispered about her now clamored for her expertise, wanting to hear directly from the woman whose work had saved countless lives on the battlefield. At first, Jasmine was reluctant. She had never sought out the spotlight. Her work had always spoken for itself, and she had preferred to remain in the background, focused solely on improving military systems and strategy. But as the attention grew, she began to see the opportunity for something bigger. Her platform wasn't just about sharing her achievements. It was about using her voice to advocate for the next generation of innovators, especially those from underrepresented groups. She wanted to make sure that young women, minorities, and those without the typical access to resources knew that they could break boundaries just as she had. Meanwhile, Judge Harper found himself in an uncomfortable spotlight of his own. He had become an unlikely figure in the story of Jasmine's rise to wider recognition. His public apology, and the circumstances surrounding it, had led to media coverage of its own. Many were impressed with his humility and willingness to admit his mistake. But more than that, the incident forced him to confront his own biases in ways that he hadn't before. He started speaking more openly about how assumptions shape judgments, and how people often fail to see the potential in others because of these biases. He began to rethink how he approached his work as a judge, vowing to be more mindful of his judgments, both in the courtroom and in life. The story of the judge and the architect of military innovation had gone viral. What started as a simple traffic ticket had turned into a broader conversation about recognition, bias, and the importance of looking beyond the surface. For both Jasmine and Judge Harper, the experience had changed them in ways they couldn't have imagined just days before, and the ripple effect was just beginning. In the months that followed, Jasmine Cole's name became synonymous with innovation, not just in military circles, but in broader discussions about technology, leadership, and societal change. Her contributions, long overlooked by the public, were now celebrated in ways she had never anticipated. But as her recognition grew, Jasmine remained grounded, focused on the work she had always cared about, advancing military strategy and advocating for diversity in the fields she knew best. One of the first significant opportunities to come her way was an invitation to speak at a major international defense technology conference. It was a high-profile event attended by military leaders, engineers, and policymakers from around the world. Jasmine's name was on the agenda, and for the first time, she would be standing at the forefront of a discussion about the future of warfare. The panel was set to explore emerging technologies and new paradigms of warfare, and Jasmine was asked to share her vision for how military tactics could evolve with the help of cutting-edge technology. At the conference, her speech was met with standing ovations. She spoke with the same quiet authority she had always exhibited, but now there was a new level of visibility that came with her words. She talked about the intersection of technology, humanity, and strategy, how every advancement needed to account for the people it would impact. Her work had never been just about military efficiency. It had been about protecting lives, ensuring that those who served had the tools they needed to make split-second decisions with confidence. But as much as Jasmine enjoyed speaking about her work, she knew there was more to her newfound platform than simply sharing her technical expertise. With her growing influence, she was determined to make a difference in ways that extended beyond the battlefield. In private meetings with defense leaders, she pushed for policies that would make the industry more inclusive, advocating for women and minorities in STEM fields and the military. She worked to ensure that future innovations weren't shaped by the same biases she had seen throughout her career, biases that had once led to her own dismissal in a courtroom. Her efforts quickly gained traction. Major defense contractors and military organizations began to partner with her on mentorship programs designed to support young women and people of color entering the technical fields. Jasmine had become more than a trailblazer in military technology. She had become a champion for future generations, ensuring that they would have a clearer path to success, unburdened by the assumptions and biases that had once clouded her own journey. For Judge Harper, the ongoing media coverage of Jasmine's work sparked a profound transformation. He had learned the hard way that his role in the courtroom was not just about enforcing the law. It was about creating an environment where fairness could thrive. He began using his platform to speak about the importance of seeing people for who they truly were, not through the lens of stereotypes or preconceptions. He even partnered with Jasmine on a series of public lectures aimed at addressing bias in the legal system, using their personal story to spark conversations about the need for change in both the judicial and military sectors. Together, they became unlikely allies, pushing for change in places where it was most needed. Jasmine's work continued to break barriers, and Judge Harper's evolving perspective brought about new, more equitable approaches to justice. Their shared mission to ensure that talent and potential were recognized in everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, was only just beginning, but the legacy they were building together was already clear. They were not just shaping the future of military innovation and law. They were shaping the future of what it meant to be seen for who you truly were. The partnership between Judge Harper and Dr. Jasmine Cole evolved in unexpected and powerful ways. Both had entered their unlikely friendship through moments of deep self-reflection and growth. Jasmine, recognizing the vast power of visibility, and the importance of mentorship, and Judge Harper, confronting the biases that had shaped his own perspective for far too long. Together, they became an example of transformation, not just for themselves but for the communities they served. Their efforts began with public speeches and educational programs, but it quickly grew into a nationwide movement. The duo launched a campaign called See Beyond the Surface, aimed at encouraging both the public and professionals in fields like law, technology, and the military to confront their biases and actively work to recognize potential beyond the obvious. The initiative focused on dismantling the assumptions that people often brought to the table based on appearance, background, or social standing. Judge Harper and Jasmine traveled across the country, speaking to universities, military bases, and courtrooms about the importance of fairness, diversity, and representation. In her speeches, Jasmine shared her personal journey, how she had risen through the ranks, how she had worked tirelessly behind the scenes to reshape military strategy, and how the lack of recognition for her work had motivated her to create opportunities for others. She used her story as a way to connect with young women and people of color, showing them that their potential was limitless if they had the courage to persist, despite being overlooked or underestimated. Judge Harper, for his part, became a vocal advocate for reform within the judicial system. He acknowledged the prevalence of implicit bias in the courtroom, advocating for better training for judges, lawyers, and law enforcement. His efforts extended to implementing initiatives that encouraged fairness and diversity in the legal profession, pushing for reforms that would allow more diverse voices to be heard and valued. His public apology to Jasmine remained a turning point in his own life, one that had sparked a larger conversation about the need for greater accountability in positions of power. The movement gained significant traction as both Jasmine and Judge Harper continued to collaborate. Their shared mission became more than just a public crusade. It became a tangible change in the lives of many. Schools began adopting programs to teach students about bias and the importance of diversity, and companies in the tech industry began prioritizing diversity initiatives, influenced in part by Jasmine's outreach. The military, too, started to embrace her vision, integrating new policies that encouraged the inclusion of women and minorities in leadership positions. As the years passed, the two of them remained steadfast in their commitment. They had come from very different worlds, one of law and one of military innovation, but they had found common ground in their dedication to ensuring that everyone, regardless of their background, had an equal opportunity to succeed. Their story had begun with a mistake, but it had blossomed into a movement that changed the lives of countless people. Through their shared efforts, Jasmine and Judge Harper left behind a legacy not just of personal growth, but of a society that had learned to look deeper, to see beyond the surface, and to truly understand the potential in everyone. And in doing so, they reshaped the future, not just of military tactics or the courtroom, but of how people saw one another.